Meeting to order. Can I get a volunteer for the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Thank you, Miss Libby.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Yes, and I can, if you like, I can just invite him up as well.
Sure. Okay. We're going to, before we go into tonight's discussion, we're going to let Dr. Register have the floor for just a few minutes.
Point of personal privilege. We are one of 61 finalists for the second Race to the Top grant. Congratulations. I want everybody. I think, and there, I don't know what this sideline is over here, except to say that there are a lot of people that have been involved in this. Lisa Wiltshire, stand up. Susan Thompson, stand up. All of you stand up. Everybody who was involved in this, please stand up in writing this. Come on, stand up. The network leads and lead principals and key central office staff and key partners, and Lisa coordinated all of this work, and we have a terrific application. We're one of now 61 applications in the country that's vying for a great deal of money. We're in the running for, our request is $40 million for our next Race to the Top grant. We're the only district in Tennessee that's in the final running. Congratulations, folks. And we are very excited about our possibilities. We will find out, we will learn by December 31st at the latest if we are awarded the grant. And I will maybe defer for a little bit later to if we have an opportunity. If you want to ask some questions, members of the board, we can talk a little bit about the substance of that. But what I want to say is that it is a huge next step for us in this district. It's taking advantage of what we've already done with Race to the Top, and it's moving us to a much higher level. I'm very excited about the possibilities here. I know how hard the people in the room worked on this. Lisa has been on special assignment for almost 2 months now, and coordinating this work. And Susan's come on board, and the network leads and and lead principals, please stand up. The basis of a lot of our work, is that all? Are there only 3 of you that are here? Elaine, Farner?
The 3 that matter.
Okay. A lot of what our grant proposes is to look at this model of empowering and authorizing and giving autonomy to principals and bringing it to scale. And that's a very important part of this thing, and it's one of the most innovative parts, and one of the things that I think will really make us very competitive nationally as we go forward. So congratulations to all of you for the work that you've done on this. We're very proud of you.
Great job.
Madam Chair, members of the board, if you'd like for me to, I'll be glad to introduce the work session topic.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. We are here tonight to talk about Common Core and Common Core implementation, and I will go back to our application again. It's so closely tied, so intricately tied to Common Core that we're very excited about the possibilities that we have with Common Core also. I want to ask Susan to come up, and those of you who are key presenters, please come fill this in. This is not a formal board meeting, so those of you that are presenting, come on up here and have a seat, as many of you as would like. And so, Susan, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
And before, Susan, before you take the control, board members, if you will log on to parconline.org, that's www.parcconline.org. That's going to be part of the presentation, so we just want to make sure that you have it pulled up when we start the discussions. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening, Board. Dr. Register. I'm going to simply go over what we're intending to get accomplished this evening about the Common Core. We asked our questions, what else did you need to know that we weren't able to share in the time we spent with you in the board retreat? Where are we in implementing the Common Core? What do we still have to do? And what are our plans in getting there? So that's sort of the overarching look that we were looking at that. We're going to show you a very, very brief 3-minute little video that we would like to put on our website that we think says in very simplistic language, very clear language, what this whole Common Core thing is, because we know there's lots of mythology around Common Core. So we just want to start there from the beginning. And what we intend to do this evening, we have an outline there, an agenda for you, is we want to let you see what an ELA standard looks like, what a math standard is, what we're taking our teachers through the process so that you get an understanding of what we're talking about when we talk about these standards. You've already logging on to the PARC assessments. We want you to see what kind of assessments our students are going to be taking and expected to do and show their knowledge of these standards. And then we're going to talk about how do we take this to scale in a district this size. And that's been our critical piece in looking at implementing this. And then we'll tell you about some of our next steps and open up for any questions or things like that. So I'm going to let Kelly go ahead, and once she shows that little video, then I'm going to turn it over here and they're going to take you through the process. So thank you.
Thanks.
Like it or not, life is full of measuring sticks. How smart we are, how fast we are, how well we can, you know, compete. But up until now,
Can you introduce the team while
Yes. Sorry. So while we're waiting for the introductions, why don't we go ahead and this is...
I'm Jill Flaherty. I'm the coordinator of English Language Arts and World Languages for the district.
I'm Jessica Slayton. I'm the numeracy coach at Antioch High School.
And I'm Dave Moore, the Executive Director of Instruction for Elementary Schools for the district.
And so we don't drive the cameramen crazy, if you could speak into the microphones, that would be great.
It's going to be the middle mic.
Okay. Thank you.
like it or not, life is full of measuring sticks. How smart we are, how fast we are, how well we can, you know, compete. But up until now, it's been pretty hard to tell how well kids are competing in school and how well they're going to do when they get out of school. We like to think that our education system does that. But when it comes to learning after graduation, is a girl in your neighborhood being taught as much as her friend over in Clayton Senior in, say, St. Louis, as prepared to get a job as the graduate in Shanghai? Well, it turns out the answer to both of these questions is no. Because for years, states have been setting different standards for what students should know and be able to do at each grade level. That's making it too hard to know if our kids are really doing well enough overall, and if they can really compete for a job someday. What we really need are clear goals. That's where the Common Core state standards come in. They're like a total sea change in education. Consistent, strong, clear benchmarks for English language arts and math. Here's how it works. You can think of kindergarten through 12th grade like a giant staircase. Each step is a skill your child needs to learn before stepping up to the next one. But right now, too many kids aren't really confident with like 2 + 2 before they have to move on to 2 × 2. We need more focus on the skills that help them move up the stairs, or they can slip up and fall behind. And there's another problem. What if everyone's stairs were made at different heights? Well, here we go again. They are. So, a boy in Seattle who's rocking an A in English literature could be getting a C on his Chicago friend's staircase. Oops. We need to create consistent steps in education, too. So first, each standard creates a landing on the staircase, a stop along the way as your child heads toward high school graduation. Each stop is a chance for every parent and teacher to focus on the skills their students are supposed to know at that step, no matter the zip code, language, or race. And more importantly, each standard makes sure all students are learning what they need to know to get to graduation and beyond. Because something like counting to 100 leads to understanding dollars and cents, which eventually leads to understanding how to manage a budget. Secondly, the standards are consistent from school to school, and they match up against international standards too. Now we know how we're doing compared to just about everyone. So even though local communities will still design their own curriculum, with the same rules, everybody can compete on the same kind of staircase. But standards aren't learning. That's why we need teachers, parents, and students to help make that happen by working together to help kids meet these standards. The world's getting more and more competitive every day. But now, when our kids get to the top of their staircase, they can have way more options on where their life goes from there. Clear goals, confident, well-prepared students. That's the Common Core State Standards.
Okay, thank you for watching that video. Hopefully that helps you understand what's going on with Common Core a little bit. One of the things that we really like about Common Core is the spiraling that takes place from grade level to grade level. Each grade level builds on the next, and it's very exciting that there is a connection, a clear connection from grade level to grade level that teachers can see. And in working together, they can fill any gaps and make sure they're helping students achieve what they needed to achieve to be prepared for the next grade level. So what we've done as a group is pull teachers together to do what we call unpacking or deconstructing standards, so that teachers can and students can understand what is expected of them.
So the first question is, why should we actually unpack? And thinking about the process myself and going through, there are benefits for both teachers and for students with unpacking. It really helps us set clear expectations for the students so they all know what they need to, the goals they need to meet, and they can see the steps that they need to follow to reach those goals. It also provides consistency. When I look at a set of standards on my own, I might think it says one thing, and another teacher might think it says something else. So we met as groups, and we talked about them and really thought about the content and what it meant. And we unpacked together so that we could say, yes, this means this to me, and it means the same thing to you. So we'll be holding our students to the same expectations. It also helps us see what support our students need. We call that scaffolding. Scaffolding is the same in construction as it is in education. It's a support. And so we need to know what support our students need if they're going to reach these lofty goals, because the Common Core standards are complex and more complex than some of the things we're doing right now. And we need to make sure that our students really have support so that they can reach those goals, especially as we're transitioning. It's also really helpful for students and teachers to monitor progress. When we create these learning targets and see what the standards say, I now can look at my students and say, okay, you are progressing, and they can see that too. They have a list in front of them or some clear smaller pieces of the target or standard, and they can say, yes, I've done that, yes, I've done that, and they gain this self-confidence. And we as teachers can then work with them and say, yes, you've done this, 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 let's work on the next step so that we can meet the goal. And the other thing that it really does is it exposes the students to the appropriate academic vocabulary. We've kept the standards locked and only the teachers look at them in the past. And unfortunately, then our students aren't hearing the vocabulary they need to hear, and then maybe on a test they're surprised, oh, is that what that's called? I didn't know that's what the term was for this process. Well, with unpacking, you start sharing the standards with the students in the academic terminology, or using that vocabulary, but also making it student-friendly. So you're bridging the gap then. I started doing this with my students a few years ago, and I was amazed at the things they started saying to me. They would say things, I can find the sum of a rational function with unlike denominators. And they were saying these things, I thought, where did that come from? But they'd seen the terminology, they recognized problems that aligned with that terminology, and so they started using the terminology just like we would hope that they do. So those are some benefits for why you would unpack and how it helps both the teachers and the students.
Setting those clear learning targets is really beneficial to teachers and students and administration and anyone else who can be involved. With our standards, our new Common Core standards, they are year-long standards. So we can't expect a student the first time they're exposed to it to become proficient, to become advanced in that particular standard. So by unpacking these and creating those learning targets, it does scaffold the learning, and it breaks that learning down so that learning can occur throughout that year. And we can build in those benchmark pieces along the way to make sure they are proficient on target when they need to be on target, so by the end of the year they have mastered that whole standard. So we want you to look at how to unpack the standard. So we have a slide, but we also have a flow chart in that first packet of papers that was on top of your big stack. We have all kinds of handouts for you guys tonight. So that very first page was about why we deconstruct and create learning targets. But the second page is a flow chart that when we pull teams of teachers together to work on these, or instructional coaches to work on these, we go through this flow chart together and we see how to do the process. And so we start by reading the standard together, and we have the discussion of what it truly means, what the overall intent of the standard is. And the handout right behind that one, we're going to unpack one together in a few minutes. But what we also do, and we're going to unpack the 4th grade #1 standard for informational text, the very first one there. But you see I've got a box around it and an arrow that goes from the 3rd grade standard to that 4th grade standard, and then an arrow from the 4th grade standard to the 5th grade standard. We need to be very aware as teachers as we start this process of what that standard prior to the one we're unpacking says. So we know what learning should have taken place prior to that standard, and we know what we're preparing the students for in the next grade level in that same row of standards, if you will. So we look at that. We look at all 3 of those pieces and make sure we understand that true intent of the standard. If we do come to agreement on that, great, we move on to the next part. If not, we continue discussion. We might bring another person in, get another perspective to make sure we are all in consensus of what that standard's intent is. After we've done that, the next step is to identify the nouns and verbs, because you're identifying the concepts and the skills that are in that standard we want the students to master. So after we've identified those nouns and verbs, then we add specifics to those. We define them or add clarity to them in the context of that standard or an overall context, because we need to make sure we understand what that verbiage means. Now, we've been working on this for a while in our district on really unpacking these. Now, we did it with our state standards, but these are much more complex than ours, and you should have heard some of the rich discussions that have taken place on what some of these terms mean and how to really take it deeper. And so again, we'll refer back to the previous grade level to make sure we're building in complexity. So we're not leaving our students behind. We're building them up to be successful for the grade level they're in and the next grade level. So after we've identified the verbs and the nouns and added specificity to them, we use that information to create those scaffolded learning targets. So how can we break that standard down into pieces that a student can master those chunks along the way, so that by the end of the year they've mastered all those pieces and now are proficient or advanced in that whole standard. So when that big EOC comes along, they're ready for it and they're prepared. So those scaffolding pieces are built in, and we scope and sequence those out. So we give teachers the idea of, you need to be this far within that standard at this point. So this first 9 weeks, you need to be at least this far within this standard. By the end of the second 9 weeks, you need to be at least halfway through those learning targets, and so on and so forth. So by the end of the year, they have mastered that standard. So after we've created those learning targets, we make sure they're all there. We come to agreement, yes, these are the pieces we need, and if that's the case, we can move on. If not, we add others as needed. So once we've moved on, we make sure they are in student-friendly language. Once they're in student-friendly language, we look for any vocabulary pieces that we need to identify, not only for the teachers, but for the students, that we need to make sure is included within our instruction. After we do that, what's not on our flow chart, I ran out of room, it looks like, we also identify the Bloom's levels, because that's very important, because we want to make sure we're reaching the highest level of Bloom's that that standard is addressing. And sometimes the wording of the standard can be deceiving, and we're going to look at one that's that way tonight. And then we also look for any prerequisite knowledge that we need to make sure our students have prior to tackling this particular standard. So, if you will now, looking at the one that I've got highlighted or boxed in, that 4th grade standard, the number 1 on informational text for K-5, I also have a template underneath. The template is the template that we use to unpack individual standards. So we're going to go through this process. You have colored highlighters at your seats. So what we do as a group, we pick a color, we come to consensus. One of our colors is going to be for nouns and one of our colors is going to be for verbs. So Ms. Mays, would you like yellow? Which one would you like to do? Yellow is noun. So for that 4th grade standard, number 1, I'm going to read it to us very quickly. I would like you to highlight all the nouns you see within that standard. Now remember, a noun is a person, place, thing, or idea. Just a refresher there. Refer to the details and examples in a text when explaining what the text says explicitly and when drawing inferences from the text. So you're going to highlight nouns, just nouns. Now, in this process, it's okay to have conversations with the people next to you. It's totally okay. Now, how's that? That is not considered. It's a collaborative effort. We're all about collaboration here because we're using the knowledge in the room to help us with this process. Because it's not what I know. It's not what Amy knows. It's what we know together. It's us together collaborating. So everybody pretty confident that you got the nouns highlighted? All right, so let's call out those, and Kelly's going to type them on our template here. So can someone give me a noun? Details. Details. Thank you, Kelly. Next, you're a good typist. Examples. Kelly, examples. Another one. Text. Is there another one in there?
Inferences.
Inferences. Okay, now what we would do, we would go back and add detail or specificity to these terms to make sure we're all in agreement on what those mean. Now, some people say, really, you got to define details for people? Well, details in a standard may be different from one set of standards to another or from one grade level to another. So we need to make sure we're in consensus. So yes, we would define each of those. But in the interest of time, I'm not going to make us go through that process at this time because I know we've got a lot to cover and this actually takes some time. So let's go ahead and do verbs now. With your green highlighter, go back through that standard and highlight your verbs. And these are the skills that we're going to be asking students to be proficient in. Okay, I've heard most of the tops go back on. So can I get someone to shout out one of our verbs for us, please? Refer. Refer. Kelly? Refer.
Yeah, refer.
No, refer.
Not refer.
Keep that right. And kids would say that because we do this with the students a lot of times too, and we have to keep them back on task. All right, another verb in that standard, please. Explaining. Now, when we type this as a group, we're looking at it. It says explaining in that standard just as it is. But what we do, we look at just that root verb and we put the ing in parentheses. So Kelly, if you'll explain the ing to let them know that that is the actual wording, but we're focusing on explain, what it means to explain. Thank you. And there's another verb in there. Anybody see it? Drawing. And now I'm going to go ahead and add the word inferences right after that. But again, we're going to draw inferences and put the ing in parentheses. We want to be true to the wording, but yet we want to focus on how we're defining certain pieces and what we mean by those pieces. Now, do any of those need explanation that we would need to discuss as this group, or are we okay with all of those? We're okay? Okay. Now, did anyone want to say says? Because I do see the word says in there, but we didn't name that one. Now, thank you, Dr. Register. Now, we would go ahead and put that one there because we do need to realize that text doesn't actually speak to us, but it does say things. And so we would define that again for students, making sure they're realizing this is not necessarily auditory. But we would also, when we define text, let them know that text is not necessarily just written word. It can be visual pieces as well. A photograph can technically be considered text because you're examining different types of text. So we would make sure we're aware that what that means, not only for the teacher but for the students. So after we've done that process, now we would look at how can we look at these concepts and these skills that we've identified and create learning targets to scaffold the learning that needs to take place to master that standard. So for instance, I'm going to do one for us really quickly. One of the things that would be necessary, looking back at the standard and the nouns and the verbs that we've specified, in order to refer to details, something I have to do first is actually recognize and identify not just random details, but relevant details. Why would it be necessary to identify and recognize those relevant details in a text? Now this is...
You have to know what to pay attention to and what not to pay attention to. So relevant is an important
Absolutely.
idea. Yeah.
Relevant's a huge idea. So we would actually include that term within that scaffolded learning target, that they need to recognize or identify relevant details and examples, because again, the ultimate goal is for them to explain the text. So they need to know what those key ideas, what those relevant details are. Now that is a higher order skill as well. So that would be one of our learning targets. Can anyone take a stab at what another learning target might be from that particular standard? We've recognized or identified relevant details and examples. What else would we need to do? It's kind of a complicated process.
And being able to describe it.
Okay.
Explain what the details mean.
Yes, we would have to explain what those details mean, because what's our ultimate goal? We need to explain what those details mean in order to what?
Comprehend.
Comprehend and understand what that text says. See, it's kind of a complicated process when you start breaking it down, thinking, now how can we build those pieces in? So like Dr. Register said, we've got to explain those details. That's actually the main target. That's going to be one of the last ones on our scaffolded learning targets. Another one would be, since it says when drawing inferences, they have to be able to make inferences from that text. So they're going to make inferences from what that text says explicitly. That's not as difficult for some of our students. We can look at what a text says and make inferences from what it says explicitly. But what else do they have to do? There's another key piece they have to do. And it says it straight out when we wrote it down in our nouns and our verbs. Drawing inferences. Because that's what the text doesn't say. We're drawing inferences from what it doesn't say. And that's another difficult skill for our students. So we have to build those pieces in. We have to make sure they can explain what's going on and identify relevant details and examples. They have to make inferences from what it says explicitly. And they have to make inferences from what the text implies. Okay? And then Dr. Register's learning target was explain what that text says. That's that last key one that we know they've mastered that standard. So we would have that in the learning targets, and I'm going to show you a completed copy in a second. After we've done that part, we're comfortable with our learning targets. We've realized that if they can master each one of those targets and they can master that standard, we make sure we identify key vocabulary. Now, are there any key vocabulary that stuck out from you from the standard that we read or from the terms that we listed? Again, these are 4th grade students. We're trying to inference. Thank you, Dr. Hall. Inference. A lot of our students, you know, that's a new term to them, especially 4th graders. They need to know what inference is, and we would also make sure we would include infer. So inference and infer. So if they're inferring something, because the text does something so we can make inferences. The text, and I mentioned it in the learning target I stated. I don't know if Kelly typed it up there because I was talking kind of fast. But there's there's several vocabulary terms that we actually would hit with this particular standard.
Explicitly says.
Thank you, sir. Explicitly. And a lot of our students have a different understanding of what the word explicitly means. So we need to make sure it's in context of what we're trying to teach our students. So explicitly would be there. Imply would be there. Relevant. We talked about that, making sure they understand what relevant is. We would even make sure we define text, like I said earlier, to make sure they understand it's not just the written word. And we have teachers on that same page. So then after we've identified the vocabulary, we go back to the learning targets and we look for levels of blooms. Now, I did give you a handout that showed the levels of blooms. It was underneath that first packet. Just to refresh your memory, I'm sure you've all seen the different blooms levels, and this is the revised version that we look at. So we would go back through that list of blooms and make sure we're hitting the highest level that we can. Now again, if you're just looking at the verbiage of that standard, it has refer and explain. Those are pretty low levels of blooms. However, when we had them look for relevancy in the details they're doing, that's higher order. That's analysis or analyzing. So they have to analyze that text to determine what's relevant and what's not relevant. So really, if you just look at the wording of the standard, the blooms level as a teacher, I might not assign it as high of a blooms level as it actually is. It's through this deconstructing process that we realize there is more complexity within that standard than the standard says explicitly. So we go through this process with our teachers. We help them become well versed at this. When we create these documents that we're going to provide for them, we make sure that they are aware. You'll take one, Pastor, that this is not the end-all, be-all document, that it is a living document, and based on their school's data, based on their student population, they may need to add learning targets, or they can leave some off based on their instructional purposes and their instructional goals and their students in their class. So we work from this piece. Then after we get all the key ideas and detail standards unpacked, and you see there are 3 of them, then we chunk those and we look for essential questions, enduring understandings, instructional resources, instructional activities to add to that piece. So we do this in a big process, but it is so worthwhile because the teachers then now have gotten in the nitty-gritty of the standard, they understand what it's saying, and they know better of what they're teaching when it comes to these standards. So that's an ELA example. Now Jessica's going to share with you an algebra example.
The last 2 pages of your packet are a completed algebra document. I chose one standard to share with you. And if you notice at the top it says ACED 2. I want to mention something about that. Common Core in mathematics is not organized in the high school, is not organized into grade level, and it's not organized into courses either. It's organized into strands. Functions, number and operations, geometry, algebra. And so one of the tasks that the numeracy coaches and the teachers had in front of us was to determine where do we put these standards? Should they be in Algebra 1? Should they be in Algebra 2? Should they be in both? And we deal with a different level of complexity for each. Park has a framework with suggestions, and Common Core had some suggestions also. Some of those didn't match, which created another challenge for us. But ACED 2 actually refers to the algebra strand, and more specifically creating equations. So that's what that stands for. And our standard, create equations in 2 or more variables to represent relationships between quantities, graph equations on coordinate axes with labels and scales. I'm not going to take you through the whole process with this in case you were terrified there. But I do want I do want to mention a couple things. The word equations is mentioned multiple times, but in totally different, it has different meanings in both mentions. So it's actually listed twice in the nouns because there were two different things we needed to specify. The first time we were talking about that it needed to be two variables, linear and exponential, and that it's representing relationships. The second time equations is mentioned, it actually is referring to a graphic representation, not the letters at all. So there was some explanation there. So we had to have conversations like that to make sure that it's really very clear. Another thing that I want to mention with that, because Jill said sometimes the standard is misleading as far as what level of blooms it might actually be. That's why you really need to look at your learning targets. This standard says create, and create is the highest level of blooms. But when blooms refers to creating, it's talking about creating something new, something that you are using ingenuity or your own ideas and bringing them together to create something. This sort of creation here, that's writing an equation is not that level of creation. And so the blooms level is actually much lower than that. There are 3 different blooms levels that would be encompassed in this standard, but they're the 3 lowest levels, remembering, understanding, and then applying. So I think that's clear. Oh, I did want to also mention to you the prerequisite skills. That's something that's so important, and I found that to be maybe one of the most beneficial parts of this process. Talking with teachers of different levels and saying, oh yes, they do already know this. Oh, really? They already know that? I thought I was teaching it for the first time. Really delving into it so that we know these are the skills that they're going to come and already have, so we can build on that and we know what their foundation is as we're going through. And that was really an important conversation that we had when we were deconstructing these standards as a group, because the complexity of these standards, it could be overwhelming if you didn't look at all of the things and take things into consideration as you unpack and deconstruct these standards.
Through this process that we're taking teachers and coaches through, the ultimate goal is to impact instruction in all 5,000 classrooms in our district, and we believe it will. We believe by going through this process, it will empower teachers to understand what this is all about. It will empower them to be much more comfortable with Common Core and to be stronger instructors of these standards. So we're very excited about the impact that we know is going to occur from doing this process with the teachers. It's not enough that just people like Jessica, who's a coach, or people like me, who's a coordinator, do this process. It's important that we start that process and we give them a groundwork to start with. But it's very important that they work on these, that they look at these and they get their hands in them. So, because they know their students, they know what's going on in their building. They should know their data pretty well, and so they can adjust them as needed for their building. But we're very excited about the impact that we know this is going to have on instruction in our district. So we really appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Questions?
Yes, sure.
Board members, questions? I do have one question. This is a lot. It's great, but it's a lot.
It is.
So I know you say you're unpacking, spending time with your teachers unpacking so that everyone is on the same page, and that's fantastic. Now, let me ask you about how you explain this to the parents. The students are a lot more, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for, willing. Sometimes when you start to get into a different way of teaching, a different way of learning, then it creates some difficulties at home because not all the parents are on the same page. So while this is fantastic, and I think it challenged us a bit today, I'm really curious about how impactful it's going to be on parents when they start to realize how their children are learning in a different manner. Any thoughts on that?
I'm going to turn most of that over to Jessica, but I'm going to address something on the front end. By communicating these learning targets to parents as well, and they see that we are scaffolding that learning to build it so the student can master it, that huge, enormous, complex standard by the end of the year, I think it will help them understand that, yes, these are complex, but we are working strong as instructors to help your student be successful. So your student can monitor his or her progress along the way. He or she can identify their strengths and weaknesses. They can, by these learning targets, identify what areas they need reinforcement and refinement on, and they can seek that, and we can communicate that with the teachers. I'm going to turn this over to Jessica because she did this with her state standards back when she was a classroom teacher, and she communicated it to parents, so I'll let her.
I found that communicating my intention with the parents was the most important thing. I wanted there to be consistency between the grades the students were earning in my classes and then their performance on national tests like the ACT or the SAT and their performance in college. And I did have some parents come to me with concerns about changes, and I told them that was my intention. I wanted to be consistent. And I found that it was easier for me to communicate with the parents because I could be so specific on the students' strengths and weaknesses and say, it's not your child doesn't understand Unit 4, but your child doesn't understand finding a line with a point and a slope. And so then the parents who wanted to help their children knew specifically what to help with. And it became a tool that I could use as a teacher to be more clear, I think, with the parents, actually.
And I think that would be great. You know, when as a parent, I think about how if I'm going to go to a parent-teacher conference, it would help me to be able to identify targeted areas where my son or daughter has weaknesses, as opposed to saying, oh, well, she or he is having issues with math. Well, that's wide open. So that's why I like this, because it gives you that targeted area. And as a parent, even if I'm not great at math, I know exactly how to get help on this specific issue. So that's fantastic. So thank you.
It also makes the transition into standards-based grading much easier. Because now, instead of it being, oh, your child didn't do so well on Gatsby, they can look at it and say, okay, it wasn't Gatsby they didn't do so well on, because we can, again, using this method and breaking down these into these learning targets like we do, we want to let students have a little bit more voice and choice in some of the novels they read that we use for instruction. And we can have a multitude of novels going on, but we're teaching the standards. So we can still address what standards the student needs assistance with within any text. So it makes it much more standard specific in that conversation, like Jessica said, instead of, oh, your child failed the test on Gatsby. It's not that. It's what areas, what skills are they not proficient in.
And I imagine it also helps the children academically. It will help them in their academic performance because they can then target for themselves what needs to be improved upon.
One of our instructional resources is to provide goal sheets for students. So as they're learning targets, and that is how their instruction is delivered, one of the things they can do after assessments, they can fill out a document that says, here are my areas of strength, here are my areas of weakness, here's what my plan is to address this. So we really want to get the student much more involved, and this is a way to do it.
Okay. Dr. Gentry and
the thing
Mr.
that I
Hayes.
find very interesting about this reminds me of my second grade report card, my first grade report card. Remember the first grade report card? It had actually, shapes, colors, numbers. And how many years ago was that? A lot. So I always find it interesting how we come full circle back to the basics. We can make this very, very complicated, or we can teach like we know how to teach. And so I think that the comment that Ms. Mays made about it taking a lot of time, I think taking time to prepare to prepare the lesson, because we haven't gotten to the lesson yet, right?
Right.
We've just prepared what the lesson should be about. Then we've got to take time to create the lesson plan, because those don't go away.
Right.
And then we have to educate the students so that they can be as active as what you just explained.
Absolutely.
In that entire learning process. So I don't know how many hours of the day I've eaten through right now, but that's a concern. So I don't know if we get more refined in another presentation about how that is accomplished when on a clock. And we always talk about more time on task. I would like to see how does that translate into time that we use to do that.
One of the things we've done, full implementation of Common Core is not expected at this point. We wanted to get ahead of that. We wanted to make sure these tools were provided. One of the things that we're planning through the professional development, the rollout of these pieces and this training with teachers, is to provide a work day where they are actually working on those lesson plans and those unit plans in a collaborative setting, where they're sharing ideas with each other to create those. And it is a full day that we set aside for that, and we've got one planned for the first 9 weeks, and we've got another one planned for the second 9 weeks to get them working as teams of teachers on planning strong lessons.
So that's intra-school or inter-grade? How does that work?
For elementary, it's intra-school. We have PLCs that meet every week that look at standards specifically. Also, professional development that is provided, say for instance, around ELA literacy or around mathematics standards, and those are ongoing pieces. That's the nice part about having embedded professional development, having instructional coaches in the building, is that can be planned. It can also be on demand.
So, understanding I have never taught a child in a classroom setting, do not aspire to do so. However, when I hear the phrase Common Core, and you say it happens within a school, where is the replicability and the transferability to kind of maximize if we've got this and it's Common Core, how do we get to the point where I don't have to repeat the process 100 and X number of times per school, but I can do it at a higher level and it gets cascaded down so that there's some way to take advantage of the fact that this is now Common Core. We should all be learning the same thing. We now have a common rubric. We should all be speaking the same language at the same grade level. How do I maximize that? And you don't have to answer it now. Maybe we haven't thought about it.
Well, I want to say two things. One, piggybacking off of what Jill was talking about and Dave, and that is teaching teachers that things should not be done in isolation. That we are teams within the building, whether it's grade level teams, horizontal teams, or it's vertical teams. But going beyond that, that we can learn from the teachers in other buildings, that we can plan with teachers between schools. And one of the things, and we're going to talk about it a little more in just a minute, but I'll go ahead and bring it up, is the movement to the new learning management system, SchoolNet, where we will be able to house all of these documents that we are showing you tonight so that teachers can immediately log onto a computer from anywhere and bring up the scope and sequence, any living document, but also that we can start collecting, you can call them model lessons, so that a teacher at I'm high school, so I'm going to pull from Antioch High School, can share a lesson with a teacher at Glencliff High School. And so it becomes a process that goes outside the building and into the district so that we are impacting every classroom in the district and not just in individual schools.
Last question, and again, I know we're early in the process, so I'm going back to my second grade report card. Does the student have something other than knowing their strengths and weaknesses, just sort of a checklist of skills that they can check off that they've mastered? This is my fourth grade sheet for math, and it has 100 concepts on it, and it's a little square next to it. Keep it simple. Check it off.
Go ahead.
One of the things that I know I've done a lot of work with, and I'm trying to spread the word to other people, is to report grades standards-based instead of by a unit or that sort of thing. So it becomes that. When I had a grade speed account, it didn't say Chapter 2 test. It said writing the equation of a line.
Right.
And so the student would see a grade for that and say, oh yes, that, okay, I know my grade for that. And I think there are teachers across the district who are doing that sort of thing and trying to be more transparent with what the grade actually represents and saying this A or this 92 represents your ability level with this particular skill.
The middle school, rolled out grading for learning this year, and that is a part of the whole grading for learning / standards-based grading, where students own their learning and can tell you at any point what they know and what they do not know. Teachers should be able, parents should be able to log in and immediately see what target their student knows, what target their students do not know.
Well, you're also kind of fearful of the word checklist, however, because we don't want teachers to think, oh, done that, don't have to do that anymore. Because the one thing about Common Core, again, these are year-long standards, but we do want students to be able to check their progress throughout that whole standard. So for a student, I can see it as being a check for their understanding.
I was specifically talking about the student.
Yes. So we are fearful of that word when it comes to teachers sometimes because we don't want them just to, oh, I'm done. But with students, absolutely communicating so they get those learning targets. They're going to cover that 9 weeks or that unit so they can see where I am as a student regarding that standard at this time. So yes.
For the sake of time, I think we've got a lot more to present to you all. So, but thank you, Jill and Jessica. Dave?
Yeah. You guys, did you guys all log on to the Park online? If you want to log on to Park online, Kelly's going to do it right now also, and you can either do it yourself or follow along. PARCC.
PARCC online.
Online altogether.
Spell it wrong, it'll actually tell you where to go.
Yeah. Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Careers. On the, where it says the Park Assessments, Kelly's going to click on the Park Assessments. And over to the left-hand side, there are some examples. This is kind of all we have right now to go on to kind of guess what the Park Assessment's going to look like. It's going to be very different than TCAP or anything we've experienced before. It's not, it'll be less about preparation for test taking. For instance, the focus is not going to be on get rid of A, get rid of D. Now let's see, what could be, and it's going to be B or C. This is going to have a much greater depth, which is great. However, it's quite a shift in how these would look. Kelly, are you?
Am I clicking on item and task prototypes?
Yes. And Kelly clicked on the item and task prototypes. With Common Core, 2 areas, ELA literacy and mathematics. The interesting part about this is that when this goes on 2014, 2015, this will be online testing. There will be pieces, part will be machine scored. However, some will have to be hand scored. So this is going to be interesting. It's also going to require computers. And Kelly, go to 4th grade math, would you? And scroll down. And you will see it says a prototype. And you should be able to go to the prototype. And on the left-hand side, there is a red place where it says elementary school tasks. If you'll click on that. And if you'll scroll over, yeah, there you go. This is about, and then go scroll over to the right, Kelly, and it will say task part A, I believe, and click on that. There we go. So this is what it will look like. The kids will have screens in front of them. They will click and drag these. You see the less than signs. They'll have to put those in place and then submit. And this is a process we have this year. the rest of this year and next year to practice. So there are many, many embedded skills, as you can see, on what's actually going on here. And keep in mind, this is 4th grade. It continues in complexity as we go through all the way into high school. And then Kelly, if you'll scroll down just a little bit, and you'll see there's a submit part right there, so you kind of get an idea of this is not your grandfather's achievement test. It's going to ask for a lot more at that point. As you can see, you have lots of choices there to look at some of the prototypes. When you have a chance, just kind of go through there, look at them. I do want to do one more thing, Kelly. If we can go back, I want to look at the ELA. The ELA literacy part, and Kelly, I think let's go to 10th grade if you would.
Oh, literacy.
And then scroll down, and you'll see a task there. The interesting part on these pieces, from this point forward, it will be, you'll actually be clicking, and then you'll be reading text online, and you will be answering from text. You will also be having to back up what your thoughts are by finding pieces within the text, which is great. However, that's a different kind of animal than we've seen before at that point. You will be typing online, typing right into here. It'll ask for summaries, those kind of pieces. So when you do have a chance, kind of scroll through that and see what's happening at that point with all those. This site is updated often. We usually get some type of reminder that in a few days it's going to be updated, some more prototypes. This is PARC. There's also another consortium which has 23 states, Smarter Balanced, and they are also functioning somewhat independently, but they've begun to talk to one another so that when we look across the United States at all 46 states, that we'll have some continuity. There is a chance. We don't know whether they're dating now, but they may get engaged. We don't know whether a marriage will happen, but it would be nice because then you'd be looking at all 46 states with things very similar. So we'll see from that point. I want to share with you in the summer, it was we basically had professional learning planned for the summer, and we were told that we would begin to work with constructed response assessments of having students do tasks with mathematics, and that we would have training. And so many of our principals became trainers for the district and for the state. Many of our teachers and instructional coaches became core coaches for the state and our district, which is great because that embeds that within. And so there were about 400 of us for 3 days at Hunters Lane High School, and which was great also because it goes back to the whole idea of collaborating, sharing ideas. I want to show you an example of the task. This is a 4th grade task. Let me give a little background here. This was our first foray into this. We had, on October 23rd, all of our 4th grade students and all of our 3rd grade students, as well as 5th through 8th, were given a constructed response. In fact, they were given 4 tasks. They had 60 minutes to complete this. They had to show representations, they had to show words, they had to back up and be able to make this work. This is very interesting also. In the past, it's always been about content. You know, did you get it? 2 + 3 = 5. But this time it was about content, but it was also about mathematical practices. For instance, perseverance, attention to detail. These are pieces that were also looked at. So on content, it could be a 0 or a 1. On the mathematical practices, it might have 3 embedded. It might have 7 embedded. There might be 2 standards addressed within one task. So I'll share this with you. I'll leave the rest of them over here on the corner so you guys can look at them. But this is what the kids had to do.
Yes. Madam Chair, and to the team, I wonder if we could kind of go back up into the clouds for a minute and just think about this from a framing perspective. We do have, I think, people watching at home, parents and others who may not be completely familiar with this shift. And I want to say, first of all, I think the presentation, the front end of this presentation was quite good. The video did as good of a job as anything I've seen explaining what this is all about. So kudos to Council of Great City Schools, and I think it'd be great if we'd make that video available to parents and other people who may be trying to educate themselves about this stuff. And thanks also for the lesson plan. I would wager that we are one of the few school boards in America who are really getting a classroom lesson on Common Core, and that makes me happy. And that's the reason I think all of us want to do this is to understand what's going on in the classroom and how we can improve it, or from a policy level. I do think it's important to remind people that this is a movement nationally. This is not just something that we're doing at MNPS. This is actually thousands of school systems across the country, 45 states. This is an initiative of the president, of our governor, and you know, dozens of other states. And you know, just to kind of try to reframe what this is all about, standards previously, correct me if I'm wrong, were just very different and irregular state to state to state. It'd be like, you know, playing on different sized football fields, you know, no matter where you went, and it becomes hard to measure. And so this is part of a national movement. And then the move to common assessment is sort of, you know, breaking the bubble, if you will. The old bubble tests are getting ready to move to online tests that have the same sort of contextual assessment capacity as we're describing with Common Core teaching and learning. I do want to say, in the interest of disclosure, Madam Chair, I want to acknowledge I've worked around Common Core and common assessment advocacy, both inside and outside government, for the better part of a decade, so I'm not without bias in this, but I have checked my advocacy at the door tonight. And what I'm hoping we can do later in the conversation is have a really super unvarnished dialogue about, you know, what's working in the transition so far, and more important, what's not working, and what, if anything, you guys need from the board to improve it. And again, just in the interest of framing this, I have a very baseline question. In your opinion, as practitioners who are seeing this work play out in the classroom, does this really represent the kind of profound shift in teaching and learning that people have claimed it does? Number one, and then if so, just talk about that for just a couple of more minutes. What does that really mean in terms of actual change of instructional practice? You know, what have we been doing last year, and how is what we're doing now different?
Perfect segue. This is a great example. Constructive response assessments. In mathematics, I was taught this way. I went to college and was taught a certain way, and then for my years in teaching, and it was to teach children how to memorize an algorithm and to memorize, but without understanding. When you look at constructive response assessments, and then you have teachers in buildings grading, by the way, all these across the district were double scored. You have teams of teachers looking at these tasks, deconstructing the understanding that's present there. It has begun that shift in thinking about the depth of understanding that's necessary for boys and girls to be college and career ready, what it needs to look like at that end when these tasks become more challenging, but they are relevant tasks. They are tasks where you have to make sense of them, and it appears that they also were able to problem solve outside of this. If you can do this, then you can take this, and I believe you used the word to replicate this in your daily life, and that's the way it was designed. The professional learning that happened among the teachers, our elementary schools, I can speak for them, and the middle schools, that is 3 through 8, but with elementary schools, for instance, of the 3rd grade, the 4th grade scored those, and then the 3rd grade scored the 4th grade. Several schools did K4. Everybody participated in it, which was great, because if you're teaching kindergarten, it's important for you to know what 4th graders are going to have to be able to do as they make that transition to 5th grade. So you get the idea behind that, it's a remarkable change in the thinking and the rigor. Jill said something earlier which I think is worth mentioning. These are year-long standards. And for instance, there was a chance that if you, Mr. Pinkston, in 3rd grade, somebody might put a check and say, you know, you've mastered it. However, then you may never see it again. With Common Core, the expectation is that the rigor is increased, during each quarter. So you're looking at those blooms kind of pieces. Maybe by the end of that year, by the end of the fourth 9 weeks period, that you would actually be making greater application, analyzing those kind of pieces so that you build that rigor as it goes through. So it is causing shifts. I'm glad we started when we did with K2 and then 3-8 in high school, and then I think we are well on our way. But it is an instructional shift for the thinking of our students, but also for our teachers in how to teach at this level.
Thank you.
I can also say that, 4 years ago, we adopted new standards in the state of Tennessee for English language arts and math because it was determined at that point that we had some of the lowest standards across the nation. And so there was work done to create standards that were more rigorous at that time. And I think they did a good job, but when it was handed to the teachers and the teachers took it back to the classroom, they had a standard, they had a grade level expectation, then they had a course level expectation to look like, and then they got a list of state performance indicators, which really turned into a checklist. And they were teaching really tasks. They were moving from one task to another, missing the big picture. And so I think that is going to be a major shift, or is a shift in our classrooms, going from teaching those very specific tasks, those performance indicators, to these deep, broad standards. And that's where the process of unpacking comes in, and the importance of the unpacking, taking that big, broad, deep standard and creating these student outcomes. Not checklists, not performance indicators, but outcomes.
That's helpful. Thank you very much.
Now, let me just say, this is a very, very interesting topic, and I think we're all jumping up and down just to be able to get this information. So there may be questions throughout the presentation. I know you've got a timeline here, and we apologize sincerely if we get you off track. One other question before you go on, Ms. Shepard.
This has been, like Ms. May said, a great presentation. We really appreciate the time that it took to divulge this information to us. One thing you said, Dave, kind of caught my ear. When you said hand score, was that the terminology that you used?
Yes.
Okay.
We're talking about, hang on, listen together. Yeah, we're not sure exactly how everything's going to look because there have been some changes already in the last year or so, and so this is a perfect time just to talk about that. It looks like that in some grade levels that Common Core assessments may be given 4 times a year. And so there may be 3 formatives and 1 summative at the end. The summative would probably occur around the last week of May. You'll teach all the way through. So formative, summative. Now, some pieces on those, and this is what these websites will say, that some pieces may be hand scored. There may be other pieces that are also online. It will be online, but there are other pieces that will have to be looked at in that regard. So, and you've got to remember also, we're still looking at, we're looking at this time probably kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and there's still conversations around that, whether that would be the same number of times a year, or maybe kindergarten would only have maybe 2 assessments, and that we wouldn't start the other types of 3 or 4 assessments until 3rd or 4th grade. A lot of those things have changed and are changing as time goes along. But I did say hand score.
The objectivity,
yes, I did.
Does that scare you just a bit?
It does. Okay. It does. But I will say this. Here's the interesting part on this. When you're looking at the constructed response assessment and you're thinking about persons looking at student work, that's some of the most profound professional learning that can happen. That's your kids. That's the work that happens in your building that goes on. It gives you feedback, and with everyone participating, it does help. Now, I don't think it'll be overwhelming as far as that goes. I mean, there won't be lots and lots of things that happen like that, but there will probably be some pieces during the formative parts of the year, and then the summative, it looks like, would probably be the majority online. Does that help?
It does. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. We'll try to behave, I promise.
I've got a copy of the TCAP Grade 3 constructive response assessment. And it appears that it's time consuming, to say the least, for teachers in the building. That's what I understood you to say, right? That the teachers in the building, maybe second, third, and fourth grade teachers might assess or score.
The assessment is 1 hour.
Okay, for the students.
For the students.
I'm talking about when teachers
upgrading.
Evaluate.
Upgrading them.
Yes.
Well, and what we did was, well, a couple different things in 3 through 8 is that the one in October and the one in November will happen in the buildings. The one that happens in May will be scored by the state at that point. So this is basically looking at practice. What do we need to do? So we're preparing for it. So this is a part of preparation to look at it. Interestingly enough, several schools had great success, and I'll tell you, Joe, how they did this. For instance, let's say Kelly and I are on a team, and I basically became very proficient with task number 1. I was flying through task number 1 easily. Kelly was taking number 2, Mr. Pinkston was taking number 3, and Ms. Shepard was taking task 4. You could fly through those like that, of going at that point, and then being able to look at it. So, like I said, this was just, it's a trial run, it's practice, and so we're using it like that, and we're learning. It's like what you said, Mr. Pinkston, you know, what are the challenges here? Well, that's one of them, and we met the challenge. The kids took the 3 through 8, they took the assessment on October 23rd. The rubrics and videos and all the materials were released on October 29th. We did a turnaround and had PD in place by November 1st and got teachers and instructional coaches from all of our elementary and middle schools at Martin, did 4 sessions. They took it right back and were able to do it. So I mean, it's just remarkable just how strong and thinking the persons that we work with are. And like we said, we looked at it as a professional learning piece, got responses on what are the challenges that you're finding, how can we do things better from this point forward. But it is in preparation for that 2014-2015 year when we're looking at, you know, 3 and 4 assessments.
So do the teachers take these home with them at night?
No.
When do they find time to?
No, they use during planning times, and then also several schools just used like an hour faculty meeting and did that with many hands making quick work of it.
At this point, how long is it taking a school to complete the internal assessments?
I can't give you a specific on that. Can I give you some specifics? I mean, different schools, I will say this, there were several schools that were completed with all theirs within 2 days of the training. Yeah, and they just basically had just said, you know, let's all get this done and we can have this information back. So it would vary. However, when you have, even with large schools, then you still have many more persons being able to help. One of the things, the feedback we got was just that you became responsible for just one task, so you became an expert on it, and that really expedited it.
And in the interest of time, what we're going to do is, board members, if you'd write down any questions you have, and at the end of the presentation, we can ask all the questions. I'll give you 10 seconds, Mr. Pinkston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will be obedient. And actually, a very quick question. When it comes to delivering PD inside the building, this is something I've noticed. We block access to YouTube. So the front end of this presentation was a video. So do teachers have the ability inside the building to work around that?
Yeah, there are amazing websites that let you download videos into your computer.
Okay.
And that's how I did that.
Okay,
I
great.
downloaded it. But yes, that is an issue.
Thank you.
Yes, we have MNPS too. Have you guys used that? It's our internal, belongs to Metro Nashville Public Schools. And so we use that also many times. What you said, I do know a little bit about the YouTube piece. On many of the tasks that are going to happen on the 2014-2015 year, they do ask the kids to look at YouTube videos and then to respond to them. So that's one. You asked for challenges. That's one of them.
And
how
that's
do you?
on our next steps video.
Yeah.
I mean, slide.
Slide. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, well, one of the first steps that we had to make at a district level in order to impact every classroom and to take this to scale was to decide on a curriculum framework. And And this included conducting a curriculum analysis of what is currently working and what do we currently keep that may need to be adjusted, what needs to be abandoned in the classroom, what we no longer need to teach, what resources we need to get rid of, and what we need to add. Because we don't need to get rid of everything. I mean, we are doing, some things in the classroom that are still within our standards within each grade level. So our curriculum framework includes a scope and sequence, and this document is the piece that shows the depth and the breadth within the standards, and then resource guides, creating resources so that teachers do not have to go out on their own to determine what works and what doesn't work, what fits. And that's videos, it's activities, it's helping them make those interdisciplinary connections, creating differentiated resources that are aligned to learning styles. It's the ELP, it's the SIOP piece, making sure that everything they need in order to build that lesson is at their fingertips. So that's a part of the framework. So I've given you 2 examples, and we'll just look at these really quickly. The first one is a high school 9th grade ELA English 1 for the first 9 weeks. And that's this big document right here. Now, we used both PARC and Common Core I lost my train of thought, to inform us on how to create this. So when Jill and Jessica told you that we've gone through the process of unpacking every standard, we couldn't hand them and have them keep that document that you all worked through for every single standard. So we had to put it in a format so that teachers can immediately look at it and know what they need to teach for that 9 weeks. So this is an ELA class, an English 1 class for the first 9 weeks, and what you're looking at are reading, writing, and research standards that are taught every 9 weeks. And what the English and literacy coaches had to do was create those learning targets for each of those standards, and it's the learning targets that are scaffolded throughout the year. Now, this also shows you that citing evidence, conducting discussions, analyzing content, the grammar and the vocabulary, and the reporting the findings are pieces that support writing, reading, and research every 9 weeks. Now, the great thing is with SchoolNet, with our new LMS that we'll be rolling out at the high school level in the fall, is this will be online, and they don't have to worry about all this paper. And so they're going to be able to pull up their curriculum framework.
Every teacher.
Every teacher, sorry, every teacher.
What's an LMS?
LMS is a learning management system. That is what's going to house the teacher's curriculum. So that when they log into their computer and they log into the learning management system, this will pop up. They'll be able to see their scope and sequence. From their scope and sequence, they'll be able to click on the standards that they want to build their unit plan from. From their unit plan, they'll be able to dive into an individual lesson plan and immediately start mapping resources to that. You also have a math and an Algebra 1 scope and sequence, and they do look completely different because they are 2 completely different types of standards. We started out on the journey of trying to make them look alike, but the teachers themselves determined that it was not possible, and we had to go with 2 different formats. So what you have is, and Jessica talked about some of this, we did not get the math standards already divided into our traditional courses of Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2. And so that's the first thing that they had to do. And then there are all these little strands, quantities, structure and expressions, creating equations. And that's what all those little letters stand for. And I've given you a little bit of a legend there. So in this 4 weeks, in the first 9 weeks of the fall semester, this Algebra 1 teacher will be hitting those 3 strands. So,
yep. Going back up to about 30,000 feet, there's a very interesting piece that happens with ELA. It's like a coil. from kindergarten, and it coils on up, and it gets more complex as you go up. However, math doesn't do that. There are things that you will be taught in kindergarten, they won't be taught again. You won't have addition every single year. Those are important kind of pieces, and those are on the sites where you actually look at it and it blocks it off into grids. So there is a difference there of what the expectations are for the grade levels. Probably many of you can remember doing the same thing over and over and over again in math, and it's like, I got this. That's not going to happen. And if you think about the COIL and ELA, you're going to have more complex texts. You're going to be, and they're going to deepen as you go up, however you want to look at it, going up K-12, or you're going deeper on that. But that's why these end up looking a little different. It's not the same process. And going to scale. We got to start this journey 2 years ago with K2 and make the transition. We were able to build the professional learning for kindergarten, first and second grade, for ELA literacy, and with math. When you heard Jill and Jessica explaining and deconstructing, by the way, there are 3 words there: deconstructing, unwrapping, or unpacking. They are synonyms. You will hear them. It's according whose book you bought. But those pieces, we did the same thing in that we did it. We were able to work with 2,400 of our teachers, our principals, our librarians, our counselors, our APs, instructional coaches. That was built across the district with this internal piece that was allowed us to build capacity, because our coaches were the ones who had originally had the information, and then they were able to help build, vet the professional learning, and be able to provide the professional learning for our district. And that has continued. So we did the K2 the basic piece, the overview piece, and called it phase 1. Last summer we did the 3-8 piece, and that was, just the rollout. But with the K2, we moved into the phase 2, which was looking at them and then looking at formative assessment. That's where we were encouraged to go, both formal and informal formative assessments. We will replicate that again for 3rd and 4th for next year, and then it'll continue with 5 and 8 with greater depth. So as we roll this out, the very persons who facilitated the professional learning are in our buildings every single day, having professional learning in the schools, but then also it's just like the on-time kind of professional learning. When we have, many first-year teachers and those kind of pieces, I can actually teach with you at that point. So you have a more formal, and then you have that informal, just-in-time professional learning going on. One piece, and we have had the state help us with making sense of kind of what's going to happen. We will have next generation science standards come out. That will happen it looks like next May or June. It's in draft. So if you want to look at those, take a look at those. And there are going to be 8 areas on that will go all the way across. So that's one of our challenges also. Will this be something that will roll out at the same time? We have attempted and continue to work, like I said, the CRA, the Constructive Response Assessment piece. We were able to roll that out. We will do the same professional learning again in February, and then we'll have the final one. Writing assessments for 5th, 8th, and 11th this year are going to be very different. It will have, it used to be a prompt. No more prompts. You have a piece of text, and then you write to the text. That's great. I mean, that's in the spirit of Common Core. In elementary, since 5th grade is in middle and not elementary, we have decided to help with that. So our 2nd, 3rd, and 4th will participate in that. Our 4th graders will use the 5th grade prompt. Our 2nd and 3rd graders will use the 3rd grade prompt. Now here's the caveat here. This will be the first time our 3rd, 4th, 5th, 8th, and 11th are being asked to do this online, to type this. And that also is a practice time that helps us know what our challenges are, scheduling, because we haven't had to do this before. So when we do get to our 2014, 2015 year, the idea is to have the bugs worked out. And it's been great. We've had very, very strong success and buy-in, and a couple schools, really struggled with it. And so we've worked with them to help. There's been a lot of networking. Tomorrow will be a principals meeting, and there are times set aside for networking. How are you doing this? How did you make this work? How did you schedule that? So those are some of the pieces that are challenges, but that we are working on right now and will continue to work through. And this seems like the perfect time, and then we'll have all of next year.
Just want to remind you before we move to the next slide of the state timeline and the fact that we are ahead of the game. The state timeline says that in 2011-12 rolled out K-12 math and ELA, and Dave's already told you about the training for K-2 and how that's been implemented in the classroom. But if you look, this year it says 2012-13, only partial math in grades 3 through 8. And we have actually rolled out both math and ELA in grades 3 through 8. So we'll be able to take a look at what we've done, what we need to improve upon before next year, where we roll out 3 through 12 math and ELA. Next one. So we do know that in taking this to scale and impacting every single classroom and doing this well, that instruction must change in the classroom. So what have we done to make that happen? We've made sure that all of our professional development is aligned to Common Core. Our literacy training, making sure that all content classes are being trained in the Common Core informational text standards. We rolled out the informational text standards 2 years ago using the continuous improvement model, where we did unpack them, and we have seen some good gains in some of our schools using the continuous improvement model with the informational text standards. We are also in the process of a 3-year implementation plan to roll out project-based learning K through 12 in every classroom. We started the process in high school a year ago, and we're getting ready to roll out that training for teachers and administrators this spring. And then last, social and emotional learning. We know that we can expect a lot from students when they feel safe and secure and they feel a part of the classroom. And so we feel that social and emotional learning is a huge part of changing instruction in the classroom. So. There are the next steps.
So when we look at some of the next steps that we're talking about, the information technology and learning technology, IT, there's some big issues you heard with online assessments and those types of things, and we're asking students to be able to do word processing online to take a test. We don't know the requirements specifically yet from the state. They're still working on their plan. But we know that we have to be ready and we have to prepare our students to know what that looks like. So those are some of the things that we're looking at, IT is looking at. Our learning technology, Keisha, you went away. We have a large group that has been working on a learning technology plan to make sure that we're covering all those bases and doing those. And I think that she gave you a handout. Keisha, isn't that what the handout is? Yes. On the learning technology plan. Did you want to say anything about that?
Well, speak into the microphone, please.
I'm sorry.
The replay is awful. When this gets replayed back, if the audience can't hear you, it's horrible.
Okay.
Sorry. Well, the document looks like this that we passed out around the learning technology plan. And this plan is being developed in partnership with the Nashville Technology Council, with funding coming from C3 Consulting for the project manager that's actually helping us pull this plan together. And as Susan said, and it's kind of been alluded to through the presentation, the skill level that our students will need to have around learning technology skills needs to be embedded into the curriculum and into the instruction. And so our plan is designed to do just that. So on the first page, you see the 21st Century Framework, which is the predecessor, if you will, to the Common Core. So the core came out of the CCSSO, who designed the P21 framework, and when it says standards and assessment, in this image, it's talking about the Common Core and the PARC. And so we're using that as our framework. On the second page, it just shows the outline of the committees, who's working on it. We have several people from across the district, community members, business leaders working on it. And then the 3 subcommittees are technology literacy, curriculum design, and instructional design.
And John or Fred, did you want to talk about the IT portion at all?
I can answer questions.
Okay, we can do that. If you want to answer more questions about the IT, they're there. PSYOP, let me see if I can say this. Sheltered Immersion Observation Protocol, I believe is the correct way to say that, and that is making sure that we have the standards in place for English language learners. PSYOP is a great model for all teachers, for all students, but it's real critical for our EL learners to be able to have that. The reason we mention that is because we're bringing that in with the Common Core standards, showing how all of those standards fit with the Common Core, and that's being done. And several campuses have gone full-fledged into the PSYOP model, and we continue to do that, but we make sure that there's an alignment with that. The other thing is Fordham and Ed First is doing a research project, and they wanted to look at 2 districts in the country. They picked Buffalo, New York, and Nashville, because they were looking at 2 districts that had gone ahead. You heard the timeline, and we've already started ahead. So they're going to come in next week, actually, and start, and it's going to be a longitudinal study. They're going to look to see at our K2, what have we done, what would we do again, what have we learned from that, what are some things that we want to improve upon. So we felt like that was a good opportunity to give us some feedback also on the plan that we'd used. So they asked to partner with us, and we looked at that as a great opportunity to get some outside eyes to help us look at the plan that we did. So they're coming in next week. Battelle for Kids has had a long-term agreement with us, and Linda DePriest is here, and she can answer any questions more specifically about that. They are coming in, they're going to work specifically with our middle schools on formative assessments, because we know that that is a critical piece of knowing whether or not the standards are being met is how we're assessing those. And so then teaching teachers and training teachers on how to make good formative assessments to give them good feedback on whether or not our students are meeting those standards, so that we're engaging in that process. And then the last thing, we're convening a Common Core implementation team, which is a broader team than what you have here. As you hear, what you've heard tonight anyway, it's a complex thing to implement. Common Core goes across the entire district. It's changed the way we do our business. So we want to make sure everybody inside, at least, has an opportunity and knows what we're doing and what voice that they can give in it and what they need to do to support it. So we are meeting next week. We're going to take an assessment to look and see, have we met everything that we need to? Where are we doing well? And where do we need to look and see if we have any gaps, and what do we need to do differently? We think we're doing a pretty good job of analyzing, but we don't know, so we'll take this assessment and look at it. We'll have this cross-disciplinary team looking at our implementation process, so that when it comes down to take those PARC assessments, we are in a good position.
Can we get those results when they're back?
Pardon me?
Can we see those results when they're back?
Fred, when were we supposed to get those back? On the 11th? Did he leave? From the survey.
The audit.
The audit.
On the Common Core,
Yes.
11th to 10 o'clock.
And he asked if they could see those results.
I don't see why not.
I don't either. It's formative for us, so that's what we want to do.
Thank you.
Great presentation. Great.
A challenge that I want to highlight. There's been a lot of data coming out about the percentage of our children who have access to internet who have technology, and only about half of our kids have access to technology at home. We have to be ahead of the game.
Right.
If there's not going to be an implementation dip because our children don't know how to use the technology. And I think when you think about writing assessment, I still use notebooks, and I can use a computer too. But when you think about children who might not use computers to do writing, they have to learn how to do that and use that technology. And it's been a real concern of ours, and I know I've mentioned it to the board, that we are behind on getting our technology in place that we need across the district. That's internet access in all of our schools, wireless access in all of our schools, and enough devices that are appropriate for our children to use. So we've got to talk about that and catch. It's not get ahead of the game there, it's catch up.
Absolutely.
And give our children an opportunity to use those devices well in advance, so that using the device does not become a problem when they're taking the test.
Okay. We're going to have questions, but I promised Mr. Hayes, he's had a question for 20 minutes now. So I'll let you lead off, and if anyone else will jump in from there.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
My question while we were sitting here turned into 3 or 4 interrelated questions. It was going to be really quick before...
Did those align with the new standards, Mr. Hayes?
Yes, sir. I'm excited about the new standards. I've certainly advocated for them for the better part of a decade. I think it's a great move that we're making, and delighted that we're sharing a video and lots of information about standards with the community and the move that our state and district is taking. I'm wondering, and so this gets into the multi-part piece. We're going to assess at 9 weeks. We're going to assess at the end of the year. Does our move to new standards and additional testing impact how we promote students? So say we get to 9 weeks, and you've got now a checklist or a whole bunch of things these kids should know, and if they don't know it, perhaps intercession's a great time for an intervention. But if it doesn't cut it, and we get to the end of the year, and as Dr. Gentry pointed out, maybe it's from 2nd grade 100 things that you know. If that student knows 30 of them, does the kid advance? And that's right. We're not assessing on a checklist of 100. So does the move to Common Core and the new testing, if we find that a child with every intervention that we offer and the testing throughout the year doesn't have a handle on the information, does it change the way the child advances? Are we gonna have a kid in the 8th grade after Common Core who reads at a 2nd grade level 10 years from now?
I could talk about the text complexity that you're speaking.
Come to the microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And my hope is that we intervene, and you're going to say, we're not going to have an 8th grader who reads at a 2nd grade level in a decade, and we're going to keep the kid back, or we're going to intervene, or we're going to have summer school. So I'm wondering, is that the case? Are we going to catch more students who are falling behind?
We should. Well, I would say we already have campuses that are already putting those kinds of pieces in place. Some of our principals are here that are already doing those types of things, and they're checking ongoing, not 9 weeks, and those are the more, you'll love this term, formalized formatives. But they're constantly doing that so they know where the students are, and then they are doing interventions immediately so that they can get them up, and they're helping students set their own goals so that they know what they need to do to be successful on those, so that we don't have 8th grade students getting to the 8th grade with a 2nd grade reading ability. That's the whole point behind pushing these. It's the whole point about changing how we're doing our practice and how we're looking at it on the campus and going to that standard space. Now, can I guarantee 100%? I'd love to say yes, but I live in the real world and working with people. We don't want anybody to slip through the cracks, and we're doing absolutely everything we can to make sure that doesn't happen. And I think by implementing this in these processes, we're doing a lot more to provide those safety nets and those interventions to make sure that's not going to happen.
So if the child is retained to repeat a grade, do we think that we may see more of that? Does it offer us an ability, if the child gets to the end of the school year and doesn't have a mastery of the subject, to keep them in the grade? so that they don't advance, right? Because every year they do advance, they get further and further behind. And so that 8th grade teacher, it's going to be really hard for them to differentiate their instruction, which I believe in differentiated instruction, but it's going to be hard for them to teach 8th grade kids that are on their grade level and at the 8th grade level and at the 10th grade level in their class, or 2nd grade level.
And I don't know how to specifically answer you without saying that what the strategies and the things that we're implementing is to prevent that from happening. We have already practices going on right now, and we've seen phenomenal results by focusing on those standards and doing it in those manners. We've seen double-digit gains in students that have been accelerated because it was focused on the standard. And that's what we're moving to. And
I guess I'll be even really brief. So for the child that falls through the cracks that you mentioned a second ago, does the child advance to the next grade?
you're going to have to respond to that.
And so let's say we've got 100 of them or 200.
And that's policy, and I'm going to tell you, I'm the newest person here at the table, July 1, and I haven't gotten to that part of the policy. So I would always say I would have to look to see what our policy says, what it supports in grade promotion and retention. So I personally do not have that answer, and so I'm opening that to anybody else.
Well, there is a policy in place regarding that, and it shows that, to answer that one question,
yes.
If you have a student that is falling behind, that's not making the progress, as long as you can document intervention during the school year in 3rd grade and also in 8th grade, then that child can be promoted if you show the intervention has taken place and there has been growth. But to answer the question, that I think the underlying question really is about reading. Reading is really everything. Jill knows that. And the piece that we're trying to prevent, and we do have a strategy we're looking at, and we had PD this past week on how do you look at text complexity. And it's because the standards are on grade level, and our students are not on grade level. So how do we work closely with the students who are not on grade level so they can at least interact with the text that's on grade level? So we had people like Doug Fisher out here. We had Carol Jago, experts in that field of teaching teachers how to teach close reading. And that's a strategy that they've been introduced to last week, the week before. She's going to come back. It's just the fact that we have to make sure that students can interact with this text, and we have to prepare teachers to do that because it is hard. It's more of a complex piece. And so in that particular close reading, there's also differentiation that addresses what you just said. When a student isn't on level, and for particular in middle schools and elementary and high schools, there's an intervention block in some of our schools that addresses some of the concerns at that time during the school day as opposed to after school.
So I guess the short answer is, provided there's an intervention that's successful and that
shows growth.
And that there is growth. So the short answer is, if the student shows growth, they will continue to be promoted to the next grade.
If the student shows growth, have the intervention, and with the mastery level that we do have, as far as we're trying really hard to show student mastery. But if they show the growth, yes, they are promoted to the next grade level.
Whether they have the mastery or not, just as long as they have the growth.
If they're showing the growth in the mastery of that standard at this particular time, if you can document that. I know what you're saying.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
Okay. And then the second question that came as a part of this presentation while I'm sitting here, and this is hopefully can be a short answer. Our teachers with the new state standards and now the Common Core standards have been, you guys referenced new unit plans. I think maybe they'll have 3 new unit plans over a 5-year span. Is that right? Or at least 2 with state standards and now Common Core that the teacher would submit to somebody?
Have a syllabus every 9 weeks.
A syllabus or
that they give to, that the parents would have access to, that lists the Common Core standards that they'll be addressing those 9 weeks.
Well, really, it's the state standards, and so to the extent we've got a really high mobility rate, right? And we've got students that go from school to school. The idea is that every school, if you're in the 9th grade at Stratford or Hillsborough and you're in Algebra 1, you're going to have the same lesson basically on the same day.
No.
You have the same you have the standards
Same
at 9
standard.
weeks.
They will have the scope and sequence, which is by quarter of every 9 weeks. We do not plan to prescribe any curriculum, as long as the teachers know that by this 9 weeks, they need to have mastered these standards. But and teachers will know from school to school to school that during this 9 weeks, they are addressing these standards.
And so for I guess the lesson plan or unit plan to get to the standard, is that reviewed by
The school.
the school? And that school, when you say the school, is it the principal or is it
Probably the assistant principal assigned to either that academy or that grade level.
But it doesn't go, so if you have a math teacher, does that assistant principal have the capacity to evaluate every lesson plan in every subject matter? Or would it go to a district-wide?
That's why the coaches come in. The coaches are helping to guide that discussion. We have it pretty much in mostly all the schools, a numeracy coach, literacy coach. And they work directly with the math teachers, with the literacy teachers to design the unit, the syllabus, whatever name that you would like to, address that. So you're talking about coaches who are already content-oriented. So math numeracy coaches who know their content are helping to guide that.
And it goes back to what I said, that planning should not take place in isolation.
Right.
We do have some teachers who teach singleton courses, but when it comes to these core courses, there are a team of teachers who have built into their schedule a content planning piece. And during that content planning piece, they should be working on first quarter unit plans, second quarter unit plans, and so forth. And again, not done in isolation, but yes, probably every single one of them are turning in an individual plan to their assistant principal.
And the data coach who assists the assistant principal, is that a race to the top funded position, or is that a recurring position within the district that we've got that person forever to always help as we have new assistant principals come in? How is the data coach and those coaches, how are their positions funded?
Race to the top.
It's a race to the top.
It's a race to the top.
The data coaches.
So those coaches.
For the data.
Instructional coaches, though, are provided either through Title II or Title I.
So it's really the instructional coaches that perform that function. The data coaches analyze overall data and help school staff learn how to do that. And that's a process that's ongoing, and at some point in time, we may have completed that training, or in 2 years or 3 years, when the money runs out, we'll look for local funding to continue that if we need to continue that, the work of those 13 data coaches in the district. I want to respond to your question a different way. Don't assume the old model of instruction and the way teachers worked when you were in school. Teachers do not work in isolation. It's not 5 algebra teachers in a school and each of them working behind closed doors in isolation about looking at their lessons and deciding whether their lessons are appropriate or not and how their children are doing. It is a collaborative model now, and I think when you look at this process that we were talking about earlier of unpacking standards, is we are demanding that teachers work together. And that these teachers, when they give these formative assessments, that they look together at how students are doing and they determine diagnostically, if you will, what students need as they go forward in these years. If we get to the end of the year and we have a student who's failed, then we've failed during the course of that year. The idea is to have a personalized instructional program, and my response to the promotion and retention is this. If students are making progress, let's determine how far behind they are. It is a personalized decision about placement. It is an individual decision about each individual child in our school system that's made by professionals. And it's not made by one, it's made by a team of professionals, a group of teachers that teaches a child. And that's how we get to continuous progress, and it looks very different from what it did when I was in school and when you were in school. Teachers cannot work in isolation through this process. Teachers have to change the way they teach. And my great stress over this is we've got 5,000 of them in classrooms, and it demands, this change to Common Core demands that they teach differently to these new standards. And our approach to it is to get them involved in developing the standards and understanding what they are, and then working cooperatively together to prepare the lesson plans. We've got an online method for doing that, for putting all these lessons together, if you will, for looking at those as we were discussing earlier, so that teachers have great resources, and so that we do know that there is standard expectation. That's what's standardized. It's the expectation, what we expect of kids, what we want the outcomes to be, and how we get, and that is a part of this process. But how you get there is flexibility. And I hope that teams of teachers in schools are communicating together about what's working, what's not working, what they need to do to change instruction, or looking for help. I'll ask this question because it's a commercial. How important is it that we move to school-based instructional coaches for implementation of Common Core? You know, we've got a few hundred of them in our school district now. How important, how critical is that for being able to implement this and make the change in every classroom across our district? Now, I want an answer. I see nodding.
It's very important.
Heads nodding, but
It's key.
that puts us ahead, in my opinion.
It does. In fact, all the research that's out there, over and over, when you guys go online and start looking at it, that's the piece that shows up every time, is that districts that have made progress, and I'm eager to see when they interview, use the instructional coaching model with an embedded professional development, because they're serving the district, the whole district, but then individual schools. They also form professional networks themselves. For instance, there are clusters where they meet and share ideas because, for instance, maybe they have a lot of students who are English learners. What are you guys doing, and sharing and getting together? So there's lots of wonderful varieties of networks that are going on out there. We probably need to sing their praises a little bit more, but they tend to work and then just dive back in. But it does happen.
They're also our content experts. They're the ones who work in that content every day. You saw Jessica Slayton. I could not speak to math like Jessica Slayton can. I could not implement Common Core standards in math without people like Jessica Slayton in the schools.
Right.
Mr. Hayes, did you get all your questions?
I did. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, one other thing that we forget about, that institutional knowledge housed within those instructional coaches provides the depth and capacity in this district to continue on for years and years. It's kind of one of those hidden kind of pieces, but it's there. These are persons who've made commitments. They've taught in the district. Many of them have coached several years now, and they have that institutional knowledge that they can carry on. And it's not like it's going to go away. They're there. They're embedded. They're with these buildings. They're working with their principals, assistant principals. They're in professional learning communities, working in teams, learning together. So it's kind of that hidden kind of piece, but they're invaluable.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Pinkston, and then Ms. Frog.
So I have a crystal ball question, which is always a dangerous question to ask. We have now shifted standards twice within 4 years. The first shift was what you were talking about earlier, which is when the new state standards took effect. We had set the bar statewide so low that in this district and lots of others around the state, we were basically telling 80% of kids and their families that they were proficient or advanced. When the bar was raised to where it should have been, it turns out that number was really more like the 30 percentile range, depending on any given grade or subject. So the good news is we were finally being honest with everybody about what kids were learning and what they were absorbing. The bad news is, is a pretty low percentage statewide, not just in the school system. And we have had steady gains year over year since then. That is a credit to the turnaround that Dr. Register and the entire team in this room have engineered. But we've heard a lot of talk in Washington these days about the so-called fiscal cliff. Well, we had a proficiency cliff a few years ago, and it was a very steep drop-off. My question is, now that we're shifting again, are we looking at another proficiency cliff, and what, if anything, do we need to do to be thinking about that and preparing to think and talk ahead of it?
I will say that I'll respond in one way. That's why we are working right now. When you saw the constructive response assessments, this gives a greater depth. At least we won't have to go in blind on what the assessments look like. This gives an approach, and this will continue on through the rest of this year and then all of next year. There is more information that's become available. It was very, very thin, and all of a sudden we've started to get a lot more information about what the assessments would look like and buzz about what to prepare for. That helps me plan if I begin with the end in mind. I know what the expectations are, how the students will be assessed. So at that point, it may not be perfect, but at least we won't be blindsided. We'll have an idea of what this might look like.
And we can learn from other states that were early adopters. Kentucky just reported about their scores and what they were, and the fact that they were lower than what they expected, and we're going to be able to learn from them also, as well as the fact that we've implemented this before the state wanted us to.
But to the point that Dr. Register raised earlier, the proficiency cliff that I see us approaching, if we don't kind of do something about it, is that technology literacy cliff, to make sure that our kids have the exposure to the skills that they need, the mastery of those before the stakes become high stakes.
Thank you.
And there may be, I won't call it a cliff, but an implementation dip. There may be that. They're working really hard. Everybody's working really hard not to see that, but it is a different standard. Even if it's not higher, it's very different. I want to say this about it. It is such a good change. This is such a good change in instruction, and the fact that the Common Core forces all of us to teach in different ways, and what our students carry away from this is so much better than what they've been getting before. And so I'm excited about it, whether there's a dip or not.
You know, my teachers who have been working really hard on these standards, I think were nervous the first time, and I think that, you know, with all the publicity that came out about our standards being so low, and we got this F in truth in advertising, that it kind of, you know, it hit them where it hurt, because they thought that they were doing a good job in their classrooms. But I can say that from this point, from them working on it, they are so excited. They love the standards. They are excited about the possibilities of what their students are going to be able to do. It's a completely different mind shift taking place now than it did 4 years ago, when they felt like somebody was, you know, punching them, you know, in the stomach every time they came on TV and said, you know, our standards are so low. It's completely different. There's an excitement about these standards that wasn't there before.
Good.
Ms. Broke?
I've been sitting here sort of wondering about how much creativity and autonomy the teachers have within this rubric, because I've heard from teachers who are really glad under this model that they are able now to sort of delve deeper into the subject areas, and that's positive. I've also heard from teachers who are frustrated that they are not able to do sort of hands-on learning projects, and I don't know if that is a function of Common Core or a function of the quantity of assessments that we now have. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I don't. You know, we've not rolled them out in high school yet, so we're still in the process of developing.
My children are still in elementary, so these are younger kids.
I would say, I'm glad you asked this. We've done several surveys. In fact, this fall, just to kind of see where we were, we worked with all of our instructional coaches to look at where we were on ELA literacy standards as well as mathematics. Also, when we were able to have all of our 3rd and 4th grade teachers in for training, just one feedback was anonymous on there, and that has not did not show up at all. The only challenge for them was, and you guys mentioned this, was at this point in time of having the time to develop everything, because they want to do so much. But that had not been a challenge, and in fact, on the project part, it had given a greater ability to actually do some project-based learning, and it's very positive at that point. So that has not been feedback that we have gotten.
I'm not surprised that you hear that, though, because it's such a big change in instruction. There's so many people learning how to do this, and part of it is learning how to provide a learning environment in a different way. But the other part of it, and we have to be really careful of this, and it's been mentioned 2 or 3 times, is what can teachers abandon? You can't just pile it on, this is something that's happened before. You can't do everything that you were doing before and then add on Common Core in addition to that. We have to replace what we were doing before with Common Core now. And I think the great challenge to us is how do we take it to scale? How do we effectively implement this in the 5,000 classrooms in our school system?
But as far, just to follow up, and I had one more question too, just to follow up on the creative process. I mean, and I'm not a teacher, so I'm probably not understanding how this works, but within this model, is there is room for teaching however the teacher deems fit? That would be okay. And then related, the other question I had related to that was just on the assessments. So we are now having 4 assessments yearly from here on out, or?
In the 2014, 2015, and this will be what Park and Smarter Balance decide, and that's still in flux right now. But kind of through the website, you can look and see if they will end up with, we'll have 3 formatives and a summative, or 2 formatives and a summative, or maybe it will look different with K1, 2, and then different for 3 through 8, so on and so forth. But that is still in being changed. But those pieces will roll out in 2014, 2015.
And so the goal is eventually just to have these assessments, and that's it.
That is accurate.
Because I know right now at least from a parent's perspective, is we are so covered up with assessments that the teachers are unable to do anything outside the classroom, and that might just be part of the process of changing over to the new standards. But I don't know how many assessments we have right now. They seem to be adding a lot. That's from my perspective.
Depends on the grade level.
Okay.
Really it does. And you may be talking about progress monitoring is what they do. And if that's the case, then that's why they're concerned.
Okay. They're calling them assessments, but I don't know. Yeah.
Basically, it depends on the grade level, how many tests they take, especially when you get to grades 3 through 8, because they take the writing as well as the CRA and that. So we are taking many tests now. But again, I think with the state deciding how many, that's an under discussion. Went to a meeting about 2 weeks ago, so we'll know more about that. But this year we are taking 3 of the CRAs as well as what assessments we take. I'm sorry, constructive response.
Okay.
Yes.
I do have one more question. You mentioned there are these 2 different companies that will be doing this assessments, Park and
Smarter Balanced.
Smarter Balanced. So then who ultimately makes that decision as to what tool we use?
What assessment?
Park,
the company,
the state.
the
Park.
consortium.
The
Consortium. We're a park state. In fact, we're a
state.
governing state. There are 23 of us, and we sit on the governing board. So that will happen, and we'll probably be one of the first to know how that'll play out.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Barron? I have several questions, and I'll try to make them brief as well. One of my concerns about like the math assessment, the constructive response assessment, I'm thinking about the gifted student. And this gifted student can just click these numbers in their head. And when they're asked to write a narrative about how they arrived at this answer, sometimes they have a difficult time with that because it's so easy for them. It's like, they just know it. What thought has been given to these type of situations with our gifted students?
I think it doesn't have to necessarily be a narrative. They can just have an example of the work that they're doing to show, and then you begin to look at the mathematical practices. Do they have an understanding of number sense, so on and so forth? And I think it's a great question, because usually it's asked on the other end of the continuum, but that's perfect. I think those will be pieces, because this is practice that'll come up, and in fact I will even ask that question. We've been asked to keep a list of questions that have arisen, and that's a perfect one to ask. What do you do with kids who already seem to have this deep understanding? I guess I would say there's one piece in there. Sometimes with these, it's hard to know if they have the understanding of whether they've just memorized the algorithm extremely well at that point. And I think that's one of the pieces by using the mathematical practices to see if they really do have an understanding.
I just wouldn't want them to be penalized, for that. Another question is, are we, as we're looking at these standards, are we thinking about how to teach them in a holistic way? I know Amy talked about that, or alluded to that as well, but and teachers, I understand, have the authority in their classrooms to teach it the way that that they deem most proficient, I suspect. But I think it's very important that we teach different skills in a way that it's going to be meaningful to the child in their life, not just for our grade. But
and you're talking about like with an integrated curriculum?
Right.
Yes. And I will say this, we have used some of the Gates materials as options for teachers to use. They don't have to use them, but it shows it in thematics, and I think that's what you're alluding to there. They also have, if they choose to, say for instance, if you used a social studies or science to build around, that's perfectly acceptable. The Common Core state standards are the what. And the teachers do have the opportunity with the how there. And it goes back to what Kelly said earlier. It's great to have these run the whole year. You know you're going to see them again, as opposed to before when it was like, these are the standards for this 9 weeks. That it does give you greater flexibility. So those pieces are built in.
That's also where the project-based learning piece comes in, and an integrated project-based project, so that students are applying English, math, science, social studies to a culminating product. But that's part of the 3-year implementation plan, and a part of the training for project-based learning is how to integrate the curriculum.
Okay, so that's part of it. It's
Yeah,
built in.
it will be, and that's going to be another one of those opportunities to build the capacity within the district. It appears that we'll probably have some type of process where coaches or teachers could apply to be the trainers in a train-the-trainer model, and then build that. So once again, we have the depth of that understanding within the district, and persons who have gone through this process of moving to Common Core state standards and integrating the other content standards and process standards.
I'm going to also, back to your gifted question, I think that involving all students, regardless of what level they are or what understanding they are in projects, making sure that literacy is embedded in projects, not just reading but writing, will help that gifted student on that constructed response, making sure that they are a part of those writing products in those projects.
Yes, yes. And my third question is, in terms of our professional development, how are we assessing how powerful or how meaningful this is to teachers? Is there an assessment at the end or an evaluation of the day or hour that they are involved in professional development?
Yes, there is, and we have that information from all of the work, even starting back in the 2010, 2011. Also getting feedback, the cool part, the persons facilitating the professional learning within the district are the coaches who are back in those school buildings also, who I guess you would say are using formative assessment to know, maybe Joe, you're a first-year teacher, and maybe Sharon is you know, a 12-year veteran or something like that, but being able to know where of teaching, where to actually go, because I mean that's personalized learning also at that point. But we do have that information, and like I said, we just did the survey we felt like it was a good sampling of coaches from all of our buildings and all of our third and fourth grade teachers from our buildings of where they were with this. And this is when they were actually beginning this process of CRA, so I didn't know exactly what that was, but I'll share that with you also, because and the questions were around what's going well, what are the challenges, what can the district or your school do to support you with that, and it was overwhelmingly positive, just looking for time to, which happened when we changed standards before, actually time to digest, and then how does this look at a deeper level, and what can I use to create more depth with it.
And is there an open-ended question on that survey where teachers are asked, how can we make this more meaningful to you, or where teachers get to offer suggestions for improvement, and then you take those suggestions and
yes.
Yes.
What went well, and then usually the one underneath that says even better if.
Okay.
That's a good on that. Yeah.
Good. I just want to say thank you to all of you. It's been a wonderful evening, and I know it's taken a lot of work, and I know this board appreciates it.
Any other questions? Dr. Gentry.
Ready to go. I do have two. You know, we already have challenges engaging parents, and I don't, you know, I want to preface this by saying it's okay to not have an answer right now. But you know, in a follow-up, and I think I started this a little bit earlier, I would like to see just what is the outreach, because if you explain it to the kids and to the parents the way you explain it to us, we're not engaging parents. You know, we've got a lot of acronyms, and you know, we get, as members of academia, we get talked about all the time about, you know, we try to find the longest word and the most complex. What does say the SIOP again?
Sheltered immersion observation.
Sheltered immersion observation.
It's sheltered instruction.
Okay, sheltered, all of that, yeah,
See, I
all
got
of
it
that.
wrong.
That's okay. Didn't help me. She didn't help me. She didn't help me. We're gonna work on it. But
It took me a long time to memorize
that's
that,
okay, and I don't want you to have to memorize. I don't want a parent to have to memorize that.
Right.
Is the point I'm trying to make.
Gotcha.
So I would like to see how this is what I've heard so far. I love it, and I'm going to remind Dr. Register that he owes me an apology, but we'll discuss that later. And this is, I truly believe, where we need to be. But I think the challenge in getting there is not just in changing tools and processes and training our teachers. It's going to be able to articulate this in a way that it is, what was our two little cute little words we learned today? Relevant and explicit to the students and to the parents. And the language we're using here today, we're not there yet. I know it's going to take a while, but that's one of the things I think we really need to do some focus on. The other thing I would ask is, do we foresee that this has an impact on our teacher evaluation process? I'm sure that it does. I know that we've held off on implementing certain aspects of it, but one of the things I'd like to hear in a follow-up, you know, when you guys come back and you've solved this puzzle, is that component of it. How does this, what changes in the observation, what changes in the evaluation process for our teachers? So thank you again for your time.
And I'll add one thing. Again, we go back to the parental involvement. And it's very important that, it's crucial for our students to understand, but it's extremely important for our parents to understand, because they will be our partners in learning, we hope. We really hope that they will be. So it will be very important for them to understand the Common Core standards. It'll be very important for them to understand how they can help in this effort. And I kind of liken it to, and this is super simplistic, I kind of liken it to Legos. Prior to the Common Core, we have a bunch of Legos, and they're just sort of sitting around. Now we're building on them, and we're actually creating. It makes me feel really great to know that if you learn shapes in kindergarten, you'll continue learning about shapes as you go through. It won't just be one and done. So that's why I'm pretty excited about this. And I think, again, very simplistic form, but I think that's why we as a board are super excited about the Common Core standards and about this presentation. It has been absolutely fantastic. What I will say, because I know we'll all have more questions, just to the board members, if you do have more questions, please send them to Ms. Hawkins so she can get them to the appropriate person to respond to you. Thank you so much for this presentation. It's been fantastic. Dr. Register, any other comments?
None. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you very much.
Are there any announcements before we adjourn? Ms. Spearing?
Yes, the Inglewood Library is going to be closed for repairs December the 9th through the rest of the year. And I'm very excited about Hunters Lane High School. They had the most improved graduation rate of any high school in metro schools. So hip hip hooray to Susan Kessler and her staff. The Academy VIP tours continue this week, and there's one, I think, on Thursday at Pearl Cone from 11:15 to 1 o'clock, and one at Maplewood on December the 12th from 8:15 till 9:45. And I just wanted to say, too, about Dan Mills, that Commissioner Gibbons from the Department of Safety is going to attend their seatbelt presentation, and December the 11th and 12th, they're going to have a holiday gift store so that the students can come in and purchase gifts for their parents for a very reasonable price. So I think these are kind of fun things to make learning and the events of the day more meaningful.
Thank you. Any other announcements?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick shout out to Principal Roxanne Ross and her team and all the students at Whitsitt Elementary for allowing me to be principal for a day on November 16th. This is a good program. It's organized by the Pencil Foundation. It's a great way to immerse in our schools, learn about what is sometimes described as the hardest job in the universe. You know, we all know that you can tell a few minutes within walking in the door of a school whether it's well run. What I found at Whitsitt was the kids were orderly, they were well behaved, they were ready to learn, the teachers were engaged, and that's a testament to Roxy and her team. Like all of our schools, Whitsitt has its fair share of challenges, but they've also got real opportunities. I'm really proud to represent that cool school on the Nashville School Board. The other thing is I just want to say congratulations again to Dr. Register and Lisa Wiltshire and the entire team for the fact that we've been selected as a finalist in this district level race to the top competition. I have been through that process at the state level. I know how grueling it is and how draining it is, and the fact that this school system emerged in the top 16% of all the applications in the country really says something about the direction we're headed. So thank you, Dr. Register, and thank you everybody who was part of that.
Any other announcements?
I guess I should say that I'm going to start hosting in my district some very informal community meetings, and so I've planned one, and we'll see if there's interest, we'll continue these, but I plan one for this coming Monday, December the 3rd at 6 o'clock at the Hillwood Library, and the focus is going to be on middle schools and high schools in the Hillwood and Hillsborough clusters. And I welcome any of you that might want to come. It's just an opportunity for parents to kind of start a dialogue and have a voice in the direction that we take. And so that will be this coming Monday.
Perfect. Any other announcements? Ms. Frog.
And with that, this meeting is adjourned.